In episode 29, we're about to have a second vehicle on the Thundercats vehicle list, the Feeliner, in just a minute. But first of all, part one begins at the planet of Snarfs. That's where Snarfer, who's Snarf's nephew, comes from. Before I go any further, but it is confirmed that just before the episode began, though we cannot see it, Voltron got upset with the rest of the mutants for all the constant failures of getting rid of the Thundercats. So he decided to contact Ratar-o. We're about to meet him in a minute. So anyway, there's the Rat Star. That's the name of the ship, by the way. That just came up from out of nowhere. So as the Snarfs screamed and panicked inside the Red Star's control room, we have Ratar-o, as I mentioned before. He's flying the spaceship, and with him is Vulture and other mutants who I explained earlier is getting fed up with his mutant friends failing on destroying the Thundercats, so he's teaming up with Ratar-o. So long story short, back with Ratar-o, who's in the Red Star's control room, the first thing he did was to shoot at the Stars as they were trying to get away. But unfortunately for the Snarfs back with them, they were trying to get far enough away from the Rastar, but unfortunately they were unsuccessful. So back with the Snarfs, now they had to run for it, but unfortunately the Rastar is still pursuing them, especially Snarfer. So back with Snarfer, he was being chased by the Rastar who was still pursuing him. Instead, he got netted. So, when one of the Snarfs saw what had happened, he says, "Keep fighting." But Snarfer says, "No, stay back. Save yourself." Next thing you know, what the Snarf saw next was unbelievable. Snarfer is being captured. So long story short, meanwhile in the Cat Slayer's hangar, well, the good news, there's the second vehicle on the list of Feeliner, and also the good news, Panthro had just finished it. But now here comes the bad news. When Snarf had arrived in the hangar, that's when Panto says that without the mega condenser, there's no way that the Feeliner is going to be operational, which, in other words, nobody's going anywhere. So Snarf says, "What's that?" Well, Lionel was more than happy to explain. He says, "What Panthro means is that we need some extra parts for this vehicle," he said, "and we don't have any that is available." Well, Snarf started pleading his case to say, with or without the mega condenser, there's no way you're getting me up in that thing anyway, he said. So meanwhile in outer space, and with the Rastar that just left the planet of Snarfs moments ago with the kidnapped Snarfer, that's when Ratar-o had pleaded his case with Voltman to say if he had been called in sooner, then the Thundercats would have been destroyed right now. Even Voltman had agreed with Ratar-o, then pleads his case to say, Slife, he never listens to me anyway, which is why he's so fed up with the mutants failing in their mission lately, as I explained before. So even though Ratar-o had agreed with Voltman, then pleads his case to say when Slife was in charge in his command, he was once the ship's cook and etc. So back with Voltman, after he agrees with Ratar-o, he then pleads his case to say, "I'm so glad we're in this together to discuss a plan." So after hearing about it, that's when Snarfer has his turn to plead his case to both Ratar-o and Voltman that whatever you're planning is not going to work, he said. Well, Ratar-o has his turn to plead his case to say, on the contrary, Snarfer, it will work. And why is that? Because Ratar-o says that he's using Snarfer as bait for the Thundercats, he said. So back with Voltman, he just lets Ratar-o know that they are approaching Third Earth. "Prepare to fire the retro rockets," Ratar says. "Stand by," Voltman says, and so the retro rockets are fired. Meanwhile, back at Cat's Lair and on Third Earth, there's Chitara in the control room, and that's when the rest of the Thundercats who met up with her heard the alarm going off. So Pedro asks Chitara what's going on. So Chitara says that she isn't sure, but for some reason the signals have been scrambled. At least that's what she told the Thundercats. So Chitara has her turn to ask a question. "You do know what this means, right?" Unfortunately, in Panther's case, he not only said yes, he also says that this means bad news. Trouble for the Thundercats, that is. So meanwhile, back with the Rastar, it had just arrived at Castle Plondor and landed right in front of it. Also outside the castle was Sly, the leader of the mutants, and along with Jackalman and Monkeyman. So long story short, after Ratar-o had told the mutants to stand at attention, in which they did, and that's when Ratar-o told the mutants, now listen up, I'm only going to say this once. Then he started pleading his case to say, since he's in charge, that the mutants will do what he tells them to do, and etc. So the mutant says, oh yes, absolutely. So Ratar says, what was that? I can't hear you. So the mutant all says, yes sir, absolutely. So Volterman, who was next to join up with the mutants and Ratar-o, that's when Slide went first to plead his case to Volterman to say, this plan better work or I'll have your feathers for this, he said. So meanwhile, back at Castler, there's Snarf who is outside until he sees something or someone that's heading in his direction. It's Snarfer, his own nephew. So anyway, back with Snarfer, he's on his way to Castler, but then he had to stop to catch his breath for a while. So after taking a break, he started to run again towards Castler. So back at Castler, long story short, that's when Snarf runs out to meet up with his nephew, which at first he didn't recognize. So when he ran up to Snarfer, he says, who are you? But then he realizes, oh my goodness, he's a Snarf just like him. So when Snarf says, how is this possible? One question at a time, Uncle Osbert. Now you can tell that Snarf really hated that name. He despised it. He says, don't call me that. Oops. I'm sorry, Snarfer said. Wait a minute, Snarf says. Did you say uncle? Well, Snarfer just let slip to say that yes, that he did, and that he introduced himself as his nephew, Snarfer. Then Snarf says, are you sure you're my nephew? Then he dismisses it and said that's impossible. But Snarfer pleads his case to say, I'm afraid it's true. So Snarf couldn't believe it. It's his own nephew, but he hasn't seen him since when Snarfer was just a baby, but now he's gotten older. So both of the Snarfs hugged. So now that Snarf had realized that yes, it's true, Snarfer is his nephew, and so they were glad to see each other. So that's when Snarf told his nephew, now do me a favor, don't ever call me Osbert, okay? All right, Uncle Snarf, Snarfer says. So Snarf wanted to know from his nephew, how did you get here anyway? He said. So what Snarf wants to know from his nephew, why is he wearing those bracelets and what are they for? So instead of telling his uncle what happened, because we already saw what happened in the beginning of the episode, so instead his nephew told his uncle, I'm afraid it's a long story. Why don't you come with me to Castler, Snarf suggested. I can introduce you to the Thundercats, and that way you can explain on the way. So Snarfer agrees. So while the two Snarfs are on the way to Castler, that's when Snarf says, boy, would the Thundercats be glad to hear that you're here, he said. So meanwhile at Castle Plondor, so in the castle's control room, we see Ratar-o and Volterman, who saw it happen on screen, until Slide, the leader of the Moons, had arrived in the control room to tell them the bad news that Snarfer got away. And they just laughed at him and dismissed him. So Slide wanted to know, what's so funny? I thought this was part of the plan, he said to Ratar-o. So Ratar-o then pleads his case to let slip to Slide. Of course he got away, Ratar-o says, because he planned it that way. And yes, indeed, it is in fact part of the plan. Also, Ratar-o just let slip to Slide to say that all Snarfer has to do is bring the Thundercats to the castle. Then after that, Ratar-o explains the Rastar will do the rest by the time that the Thundercats arrive. But how are you going to bring him here? Slide asked. Why, very simple, Ratar-o says. And so to demonstrate, Ratar-o shows Slice the rat's eyes. So that explains the bracelets that Snarfer has on his arms and his tail that Snarf has seen earlier. But Unfortunately for the Thundercats and Snarf, they were unaware that it was all part of the trap that the mutants are setting at. So, meanwhile, at Cat's lair in the console room, after Snarf had introduced his nephew to his friends. So Snarfer explained to the Thundercats how he and his 43 friends had managed to escape from Thundera after it exploded 28 episodes ago. He said that all he and the Snarf friends did was to steal Mutant Taker by the time that it happened. So Snarfer also explains that after himself and his 43 friends had escaped, they found a planet nearby that is empty and has been occupied since. That's why it's called the planet of Snarfs. That's where Snarfer came from. So after hearing this, Chitara went first to say, "Really?" Then Snarf says, "Well, imagine that." After he agrees with Snarfer, what he said is true. "A planet full of Snarfs," he said. "So then what happened next?" he asked his nephew. "So what's it like there?" Snarf asked. "Well," Snarfer started to explain that it grows everything good, but then by accident, Snarfer just calls his uncle Osbert again, and he says, "Oops." Then Panthro asked the question, "Uncle Osbert?" "Well," Snarf says, "it's kind of like a delicacy in a way," he said. "But on the other hand," Panthro Snarf says, "I don't expect you to hear of it anyway." Then Snarf says, "Wait, there's more. On the planet of Snarfs, there's a lot of dances." "Really?" Snarf asked. "Forgive me, I had to skip that scene, so long story short, back in the present, in the Kessler's console room, when Snarf wanted to know from his nephew if Snarf Oswald was there. So Snarfer not only said that he's there, then Snarf had pleaded a case to say Oswald still owes him that 50 Thunder bucks that one time. So meanwhile, back at the Castle Plunder's control room, when Ratar-o found out that step one of the plan is already in place, that's when he realized that it's time for step two. So what does he do? He took out his rat's eyes, and with the rat's eyes powers, meanwhile back at the Kessler's console room, something has happened to Snarfer. He begins to glow green, and then he levitated and right out of the cat's lair. Now the Thundercats are wondering what is going on here. Well, Lionel knows what to do. Look through his Sora's eye to tell him what happened. So he did, just like what any good guy would do. And what he saw was shocking. Snarfer heading towards Castle Plondor. So back in the castle's control room, there's Ratar-o and the mutants. Poor Snarfer just couldn't do a thing about it because he should have realized right then that it was all part of the plan. Now Ratar-o, back with him, he pleaded his case to say, "That's right, Thundercats, come and get him." So back at Kessler, this time in the Thunder Tank's garage, now that the Thundercats know what's going on, they headed to Castle Plondor in the Thunder Tank. So meanwhile at Castle Plondor and inside the Red Star's control room, that's when Ratar-o told Slide to get the cannon ready, and so he did that. Monkey, meanwhile, was told by Ratar-o to get the void charges ready, and so he also did that. Last but not least, Jackalman of the Mutants was told by Ratar-o to get the molecular mutator ready, and so he did. Back with the Thunder Tank, who was still on his way to Castle Plondar, meanwhile, the Thunderkins are in the Kessler's control room. So back with the Thunder Tank still on its way to Castle Plondar, inside of the tank were Chitara, Panthro, Tigra, Lionel, and Snarf. Now Snarf feels entirely concerned, and he just pleaded his case to say how bad of a day he had. "You shouldn't blame yourself," Tigra said. Then Tigra started pleading his case to say, "Well, think of it this way. Some good did come out of it after all." "What are you talking about?" Snarf says. "Those mutants have my nephew, and you call this a good thing?" he asked. Then Tigra says, "Well, your friends and relatives did survive after Thundera had exploded," he said. Then Tigra also says that the Snarfs have found a planet nearby and lived in it. And think about it, Tigra says. Had it not been for that, they never would have survived when they did. Also, as Tigra says, the Thundercats themselves will never have this information just till now. However, Panther tries to make Snarf feel better to say, "Don't worry, we'll rescue your nephew." Then Chitara has her turn to plead her case to Snarf to also make him feel better by saying, "Think about it. What does the mutants have that what we don't already have and faced before?" she said. So back with the Rat Star at Castle Plundar and inside the Rat Star's control room, Vultureman turned on the scramblers. So that explains what happened at the control room back at Castle Air earlier. So they got ready to blast off. Meanwhile, in the Castler's control room, while the Thunderkins are busy watching the Thunder Tank on screen, but then all of a sudden the screen went blank. So Wily Cat had just told the Thunder Tank by transmission that there's bad news. Something happened to the screen. So back with the Rastar, it has a scrambler on. No wonder the Castler screen went crazy. Meanwhile, back in the Thunder Tank, Lionel knows what to do. He uses his sword just like what any good guy would do. So now that Lionel knew what was going on by looking through the store's eye, there was some kind of a shield. So after that, he told this to Panthro, who was driving the tank. Back with the rat store, now that it shut the scramblers off and was flying on top of the tank. Next thing it did, it started shooting to attack the Thunder Tank. Meanwhile, in the Kessler's control room, Wily Cat just told his sister there must be a way to unjam by somebody who's jamming us. And Wily Kit, although she agrees with her brother, she said that she's doing the best that she could. So at the control room, the screen went on and off for a while. Then Wily Cat had contacted the tank to say, "There's something or someone behind you. Do you hear me?" "I heard you," Lionel said. So back with the Rastar, it was still pursuing the Thunder Tank. Slythe, meanwhile, fires the cannon to attack it, but luckily for the Thunder Tank, it dodges the attack. So long story short, meanwhile, back inside the Rastar's control room, that's when Ratar-o got upset with Slythe. And then he insulted him by asking him a question. "You call yourself a gunner?" And then he says, "Well, maybe you're better off as a cook," he said. Meanwhile, Volterman has his turn to plead a case to Ratar to say that the Thunder Tank, along with the Thundercats, are onto them somehow. So long story short, back with the Thunder Tank, it tries to attack the Rastar the best way that it knew how, but for some reason the cannon's attack is not working on it. So, back in the Rastar's control room, that's when Ratar has his turn to plead a case to the Thundercats to say, "This is a grown-up game." Meanwhile, Jackalman was told by Ratar to fire the mutator right away at the rocks, so that's what Jackalman did. So, thanks to the mutator, the rock became the rock giant. So, back with the Thunder Tank, along with the Thundercats inside, that's when Panther saw a rock giant that's pursuing it. And so Panther told Lionel that whatever's going on, we need to get rid of that giant, he said. So Chitara has her turn to make a suggestion to Lionel and Panthro. She says, "Let me handle it. You two can handle the giant," she said. So Chitara didn't hesitate to use the cannon of the Thunder Tank, so she did, and she fired it at the cannon of the Rat Star. So back in the Rat Star's control room, when Jackalman pleaded his case, he panicked and said, "We gotta get out of here." But then Rattoro dismissed him and then asked the question, "Do you really think that's the only weapon we've got?" So back with Jutara after she joins up with Tigra, he says, "Not bad, but now all we have to do is get rid of that giant," he said. So back with the Thunder Tank, it continues to fire at the giant by using the front cannon, but nothing happened. But then the giant tries to step on it, but instead it missed, and it collapsed and fell on its back. Back with the Rat Star, it continues to pursue the Thunder Tank. Inside the Rat Star's control room, that's when Monkey was told by Rat Toro to load up the void charges, and so that's what Monkey did. So, Monkey didn't hesitate to fire the void charges. So, back with the Thunder Tank, it's suddenly surrounded by a bunch of void charges and had no place else to go. So, back with Panther in the Thunder Tank, he had trouble starting up the engines and suspected it might be shot. So Lionel asked him, "Can you fix it?" "If you would give me some time, I will," Panther suggested. "Then, okay, I'll give it to you," Lionel said. So he came out of the tank, and now he's face to face with the Rastar. Speaking of the Rastar, back inside the Rastar's control room, Sly, the leader of the mutants, saw Lionel on the tank and suggested that they had to shoot him. Then Slade pleaded his case to say if Lionel is finished, then so are his friends. So Lionel did what any person would do, distract the Red Star. So while that's going on, the Red Star continues to pursue him. Back with Lionel, he tries to get far enough away from the Red Star while it was still pursuing him until Lionel reaches the dead end, and that's when the Red Star got closer and closer. Things are looking bad for Lionel. Inside the Red Star's control room, Ratar-o started pleading his case with Lionel to say that there's nothing he could do about it and there's no place else he can go. But on the contrary, back with the Rastar, it shoots the cannon at Lionel, and back with Lionel, he dodges every attack that the Rastar did. What Lionel did next was unbelievable. He does what any good guy would do. He uses his sword power against the Rastar. So that's what happened. So back with the rest of the Thundercats, they're at the moment trying to fix up the Thunder Tank. When back with Lionel, he continues to use his sword power on the Rastar, and then inside the mutants and along with Ratar-o had panicked. So back with Panthro, good news for him, he almost fixed the Thunder Tank. When back with Lionel, he still battles the Rastar with his sword. Then long story short, back with the Rastar, thanks to Lionel's sword power, it loses control. And then finally at last, although still intact, the Rastar crashed. So now that Lionel had finished his battle with the Rastar, there's only one thing left to do. Rescue Snarfer, who's Snarf's nephew. So one of the first things he did is that he did what any good guy would do. Project the Thundercat signal from his sword, of course. And of course, also the good news, the Thunder Tank's all fixed up thanks to Panthro, so now it's off to Castle Plondor. So meanwhile at Castle Plondor, now that the Thunder Tank has arrived, the first one out of the tank was Lino. And one of the first things he did is that he used his sword to cut Snarfer free, and so he did. So after Snarfer was set free, next out of the tank was Snarf. And he and his nephew were so glad to see each other that they embraced, they danced, and everything else. But that was until Snarfer by accident called his Uncle Osbert again. The three Thundercats were like, huh? So now that everybody's left the castle, they head back to Cat's Lair. So meanwhile, at the Cat's Lair's hangar, that's when Snarf had arrived with his nephew and told Panther there must be something you could do to get it to fly. So now back at Cat's Lair, this time in the hangar, now that everyone's left the castle, that's when Snarf had showed up with his nephew and told Panther there must be something you could do to get it to fly. "I know," Panther said. "I'm working on it." "So what's the big deal? Why are you so keen all of a sudden?" Lionel said. "I thought you said nothing's going to get you inside of this V-liner." "I know I did," Snarf said. "But what I really want is to visit the planet of Snarfs for a while," he said. Well, Panthro has his turn to plead his case to Snarf to say that all he wanted, the reason that he wants to go to the planet of Snarfs is to collect his 50 Thunder dollars. Well, I guess you could say that Snarf's not very amused with Panthro's joke, and he says there must be a way to get Snarfer home somehow. So both Lino and Panthro had mentioned the hyperspace mechacadesser. That's the part that was needed for the free liner, just like they did in the beginning of the episode. And then they told Snarf the bad news and a problem that without that, nobody's going anywhere, and especially Snarfer. Then Snarf says, "I know," but then jumped to conclusion in front of Panther to say, "Oh, no, you don't. You have to promise me never to call me Osbert again," he said. "All right," Panther said. "What is it?" Then Snarf says, "I know this sounds crazy, but there is one ship that has such a part, and that ship was the Red Star, the one that was crashed earlier, thanks to Lino." So after both Lino and Panther were happy to hear the good news from Snarf, there's only one thing left to do. get to the wreck restore to get the mega condenser. But now here comes the question. Can they reach there in time? And what about the mutants? So that ends episode 29 in part 1.